everybody to our June book club with author Andrew Vargas. We are here today to talk about Mongol Ascension. Thank you everybody for joining, for watching, for watching the recording. If you didn't catch us live, I want to talk very briefly about what SASA is before we get started into the discussion questions. Okay, so again, we're talking about Mongol Ascension with author Andrew Vargas. Very happy to have him with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's see, how do I... There we go. So SASA is a nonprofit organization that works to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper pasts, building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship. We work toward our goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. We are available to on all platforms, pretty much, except for Twitter. I think we removed Twitter, but everywhere else we have a presence, and we would love for you to follow us and keep up with us. We have lots of different events, lots of live events. We have reading groups, master classes, anything and everything promoting ancient history and the love of ancient history. So please give us a follow and check out some of our other events going on. And then just some live book protocol. We are streaming live on several platforms, and those platforms do have the ability to ask questions and comment and things like that on our discourse. So if you would like, please drop a question as you are watching us, and we will see that question and we can answer it when it comes in. Just be respectful and patient with the technology and those administering it, aka me. And then if you want to rewatch this recording or share it with your friends, it will be available on SASA's YouTube channel at Save Ancient Studies Alliance right after the meeting. Like, it immediately posts within like the hour. So feel free to watch it again and share with your friends. And then if you enjoy our live events, please consider becoming a recurring donor. SASA is run and operated entirely by volunteers. So all the contributions we have go to, our licensing fees and software and all the technology and things that we use to keep SASA running. So if you want to become a recurring donor and help us out, that'd be great. And then also, that's it for the presentation. But also, if you acquire Mongol Ascension and any of our other books from our previous book clubs through this QR code right here, SASA gets, I think it's 10 or 15% of the proceeds goes directly to support SASA as well. So if you purchase the book, please do so through our bookshop, and that will support us as well. So let's jump into our questions. So our first question is, in your own words, can you tell me what the Jump in Time series and Mongol Ascension specifically is about?
So I like to say the series is like Harry Potter meets the Quantum Leap TV show, the old Bakula one. The premise behind it is that there are these modern day people who have to travel back into time to fix glitches that would alter history. And book one starts off with Dan Renfrew, the hero of the story, who does not know that his father is one of these fixers of the time stream. And he accidentally sends himself back into 1066 England, is stuck trying to figure out how to have the Battle of Hastings actually happen so that English history and the English language flows as it should. And there's a modern day storyline that connects everything together. So Dan is not the only time jumper, the fixer of glitches in the past. There are others as well, and there's a plot amongst them. So there's a war within the time jumping community. And so it's the modern day storyline that connects everything together. And I have the same modern day characters continually going to the past to fix glitches, but also to try to fight this war that's going on within the time jumping community. So the Mongol Ascension is the third book within the series, and it takes Dan and his partner Sam off to Mongolia in 1179, just before the rise of the Mongol Empire. So early days before Genghis Khan was actually elevated to that title.
That's really cool. Yeah. One thing I want to note for our watchers is that this was the first book that I read in the series, and I wasn't lost. I was able to enjoy this book as a standalone and understand everything that he was saying. So if you want to start the series with this book, feel free to do that. But I'm definitely going to go back and read books 1 and 2 because I'm invested in the characters now and I want to know. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like, some series that I've read, it's like I'm totally lost, but you did a really fantastic job of just making it like enough that I understand what's going on, and I wasn't lost. And I really liked that about this book. So on that note, what inspired you to take your characters back to ancient Mongolia? And what about this time and place do you feel is crucial to human history?
All right. So the entire series is me kind of picking little bits of history that I first am really interested in, but that I also thought is pivotal to the human experience. So as I said, the first book is 1066, Battle of Hastings. It completely changed the English language, completely changed English history. So the language we'd be speaking would be just pure Germanic language, not this mix of German, Latin, French, Greek. And of course, you end up with hundreds of years of French-English warfare, all because of the 1066. So I thought, hey, this is an important event that people should know about, because I don't think it's taught very much in the North American school system about how pivotal 1066 was. Book 2 is about the Celtic peoples. Everybody knows so much about the Romans. We have constant TV shows about the Romans, like HBO series, whatnot, and everybody can name a few, Roman emperors. Oh, Nero and Caligula and Caesar, even though he wasn't emperor. But the point is, we know so much about the Romans, but the Celts were this huge population that spanned all the way from Ireland to the Middle East, and they're just kind of a forgotten people. And I thought they deserved something. They deserved a book, just so that we know of them more than just the Boston Celtics basketball team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when it comes to but when it comes to the Mongols, now I've always been, this is tough to just say, like a huge fan of the Mongols. Like, I don't know how. Right? And when you think about their mark on history, they started from a little tribe in Mongolia, a little confederation of tribes in Mongolia, and they conquered more territory than any army in history. And so they spread all the way from China to, they got as far as Hungary in 1241. And they carved through the Middle East, and this huge empire that they built facilitated trade from China to Europe. It also probably facilitated the Black Death with the plague, because they actually traced plagues down to marmots, which are, from Mongolia.
Interesting.
So, but between you have the conquest, the trade, and then the plagues, Mongols have affected European and world history so incredibly much. And again, I don't think people know about this. They don't learn about Mongol history.
Mm-mm.
So that's what attracted me to tell this story, because I thought this is a huge story that people just don't hear about.
Yeah. No, I agree. Growing up in the States, like our history didn't really touch on Mongolia at all, really. Anything that was like outside of American history, it was like almost always like in the European, or maybe a footnote here about the Renaissance period or something like that. But most of it was like nothing Mongolia at all. So it was fun to see Dan Renfrew's confusion about the Mongol Empire as well, because like I felt like that too. I was like, I can really like see myself in Dan's shoes right now, because he's completely unprepared for this whole adventure in Mongolia, because he doesn't know anything about the culture, he doesn't know anything about the people living here, anything about the politics at all. Like I was like, I'm right there with you, dude. Like I don't know either, because I also grew up in America and I was not exposed to this history. So yeah, that was really cool to like show that in the story. And I think that will resonate with a lot more readers besides just me, but I liked that a lot. um so yeah, on that note, I really loved how you immerse the reader in the culture, despite me personally not having known anything, really, right down to like the clothes, the customs, the fermented milk. How did you go about finding these tiny little details? And what was a favorite fact that you found?
So I had I still have a copy of The Secret History of the Mongols. And my particular translation was by Professor Urganga Onan, who was actually a Mongolian professor. So he translated The Secret History of the Mongols, which is, for those who don't know, it's a book um, that was written probably around the late 1200s, and it's the only Mongolian history written by a Mongol. The funny thing is, it actually doesn't exist in Mongolian language. It exists in transliterated Chinese characters. So what that means is they took the Mongolian words and they would write the Chinese characters for those sounds, so that a Chinese person could look at those characters and know, oh, that's the sound, and oh, that's how you say it in Mongolian.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a really different way of having to read a text. So, but my translation, it's the first one that was done by a Mongolian into English, and there are so many footnotes and details that he added. So that was my primary source for all these little details about things like even entering a house. You're supposed to beat. They would have the fermented milk, the airag, hanging outside on a pole, and it was custom every time entering the ger, their huts, to actually smack it a few times. There's other little customs and details that I would have loved to have added, like even like the sprinkling of airag, and hospitality things, stuff like that. But I didn't want it to be a book about Mongol cultural
Yeah.
traditions. Had to cut some things here and there.
Yeah, you did add one that I thought was really interesting. When Dan is like in the hut of the one guy that he comes across,
Oh yeah, Sangam.
and he
Yeah.
like sits down and he puts his feet to the fire. Everybody's like,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Shoes towards the fire. Do not put the feet. The feet. The feet are the most unclean portion of the body, and the fire is sacred to life. So you are
right.
insulting the fire by doing that.
Yeah, I
So
thought that was a really cool detail. I was like, oh, that's neat.
yeah, it was actually kind of the rules of the ger, the huts that really, we call them yurts, but yeah, the Mongolians call them gers, and it was all the rules, like you cannot put your feet towards the fire. The women have to stay on this side, the men on this side. You have to go around like clockwise through the ger. You cannot just, if you're a woman and you're on the, let's say, the right side of the ger, you can't just walk straight to it. You have to go all the way around and follow the path. So it was all these little, we would call them superstitions, but I guess they were all these little cultural rules is what kind of really interested me. when I was doing all my research, and that was kind of the most fascinating part to me.
Yeah, I mean, I love the story and I loved your characters, but I'm a major ancient history nerd. So like all those little details, that was what I was really getting into. And just like the way you wove it in with Dan's journey and how he kind of like experienced these things was really great and just felt really organic. And I was just like, oh wow, like I'm there with Dan experiencing this for the first time. And it was really cool. Um did you have any assumptions about the Mongol Empire going into this idea that challenged or that was challenged by the research that you found? And how did this change the story?
So I knew book 3 was going to be about the Mongols because, I'm a Mongol nerd, and I had read a bunch of other things, bunch of other Mongol history books. Like in particular, I really am a fan of Subutai, who was one of Genghis Khan's 4 great generals, and I wanted to do something about him. And because he is probably listed as one of the greatest generals of all time, very cunning, very ingenious. And so I'd read all the stories about Mongol ingenuity and warfare and all these, incredible victories they had achieved at impossible odds, just using, faint runaway tactics or just by being smarter than their opponents. And that was so my original assumption was I'm going to write something about the Mongols kicking butt in warfare. And then I realized from a history perspective, from my series perspective, there's no real kind of glitch that Dan and Sam could jump in and fix. From that perspective, we're just 2 teenagers could just land in there and fix. And then as I was reading The Secret History and I was reading about Genghis Khan's early life, so Temujin's early life, and I was starting to read about how willful he was, how forceful, how much strength of character he had to actually achieve his dream. So I realized the story I wanted to write hadn't become so much about the Mongols kicking butt and, Khwarazm or something like that. It became, I thought, you know what? He had such an interesting early life, especially when he was a teenager. And since this is a young adult series and he as a 17-year-old is kind of when he started his rise to power, I thought, wow, this was some teenager who really had some a raw deal handed to him in life, and he rose above it all and became this world conqueror. So I thought so my assumptions changed just because I never really knew about this early part of his life. And that's where the book then ended up going to.
Yeah, I found that very fascinating too. Like I never would have thought really at all about his early life. Um, and that kind of goes into my next question. Him rallying together all of his tribes to reclaim his kidnapped wife, like that was such a cool detail that I had no idea even existed. And it reveals like a totally different side of him because we kind of just think of him as like this brutish, very strategically minded individual who's like all about war, but there's definitely a softer, endearing side where he was willing to go through all these lengths to get his wife back, which is really cool. And so, like, are there any other things that you learned about him that you would have liked to have explored more in the narrative, or that you want to share with the group? Like, are there any other like really cool details that you found out about him?
So what I really found out, and I tried to put it as much as possible in the book, because when most people think Mongols, they think bloodthirsty barbarians who just destroy everything in their path. And, they're not completely wrong when they say that either, because, the Mongols did cause a lot of destruction in their world conquest. That's undeniable. But what totally surprised me was how egalitarian Genghis Khan actually was. He ran his empire completely as a meritocracy. That just shocked me that there was no favoritism. There was no, oh, you're my brother, you get a plum position, or hey, you're a friend of a friend. There was one particular one of his warriors who eventually was elevated to one of his four hounds. So his four grand generals that kind of led everything. His name's Jebe. And he had actually fought against Genghis Khan and shot him off his horse during battle. Now, Jebe's side eventually lost the battle. And the prisoners were pulled up, and Genghis Khan was saying, okay, who shot my horse out from under me? And Jebe just volunteered and said, yeah, that was me. And Genghis Khan admired the ability to just stand up, and it's like, okay, you want a job? All right, you want to join my team? So he could overlook petty squabbles between tribes or family. And even part of the success that he had is, like the Mongols didn't know siege weaponry. It's like, okay, we're attacking China. They use siege weapons. All right, let's find people who know how to build these and let's build our own. And they would just acquire. And even when they finally did build their empire, they just said, okay, just worship whatever religion you want. Just, there was religious harmony throughout. He didn't force a religion upon them or force conversion. It was just, okay, you happen to worship this, you worship this. All right, everybody just coexist as long as you just have peace and pay your taxes.
Yeah. That's
can't forget the taxes. Yeah, can't forget. So it was this very egalitarian, this just taking people based on merit rather than anything else that very surprised me about them and about him in particular. And I did try to weave some of that into the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked those elements, and like I liked seeing Dan's reaction to when, he was kind of elevated to this position of privilege within his army, and he's like, he doesn't know me at all, and like, yeah, that was really cool. And I never thought about that before either. I learned so much from this book. And it really got me thinking, and that's a really good thing. The very cool thing that I enjoyed about this book. So you mentioned that Genghis Khan was 17,
mm-hmm.
and then Dan is 17.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, like, why do you feel like a high schooler named Dan and his friend Sam are the right people to go on an adventure like this through time? Like, what is it, I guess, specifically about maybe this age group or this particular character that you feel is critical to this type of story? And like, what do you really hope that the audience can connect with from this character and the story? Like, what do you hope for this series?
So the entire idea for the series started off because, I'm a huge history nerd. I've read history all my life. I have a degree in history from University of Toronto. I still read history books just for fun. And my kids, when they were younger, used to always come up to me and it's like, hey, Dad, read this book that I just read. It's really great on history. And I'd go through it and just, so I found that for young adult audiences, especially, the history books, historical fiction especially, the history either is researched on Wikipedia or it's just wallpaper. It's just there in the background. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have a mystery or a love story in front. And
right.
Yeah. And I thought, there's so many incredible stories in history that people just don't know about. My kids went through the Canadian school system and they learned pretty much 1800 onwards. in North America. And so they don't learn about 1066. They don't learn about the Mongols who conquered more land than anybody else, and greatly affected European and Asian and Middle Eastern history. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I write a series kind of geared towards young adults that actually just shows them real history, but maybe they'll learn stuff, but not really know they're learning stuff. And so if I'm going to write for young adults, I can't have a 80-year-old university professor as the main character. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have a teenager. He's 16 in the first book, and then he slowly turns to 17. By the end of the series, he'll be 18. And so that's why I have Dan and Sam there as my protagonists, because my original target audience was YA. Mm-hmm. But I find that the adults really enjoy the story too, because of the historical detail that I put in and the accurate historical detail that makes them think, oh, wow, I didn't know that actually happened, or hey, did it? And makes them search some more. So at the end of the day, I hope that anybody who reads my books will actually want to do their own little research, like dig a bit deeper, and find out if I'm lying to them, basically. Mm-hmm. And then go, oh, he's not, and hopefully go down a few rabbit holes and get their own interest. And especially at the young adult level, like adults are already at the point where they either like history or they don't. Mm-hmm. Whereas with young adults, hopefully I'm going to send a few down that history path where it's like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. I want to learn more.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely got that vibe through the story. And I agree with you. There's a saturated market of historical novels, which is good. But you're right. There's a lot of them take place in like pretty well-known areas of history already, like, the Victorian era, or, the medieval period, or, things that people kind of already have a lot of ideas about. So yeah, I like reading a book that takes me somewhere new and does really bring out the different historical facts about that time period and weaves it into the story. And I do think that younger audiences will like this. I read I was going through some of your reviews on Goodreads. I don't know if you do that or not as an author. As an author, I do. I shouldn't.
I do not.
Okay. Probably good. But the reviews are great on Goodreads, just FYI. But I was reading through a couple of them, and one of them mentioned that this content would even be appropriate for like middle grade readers, who I believe the age range is like 11 and 12. Even though Dan is 17 and, he is doing some dating and exploring there a little bit. But the review was like, yeah, like the way this information was presented, it would be appropriate for even younger audiences. And I was like, yeah, I can get behind that for sure. It's like, let's really try and reach the younger audience. And that's kind of like the whole goal not the whole goal of SASA, but that's a huge goal of SASA, is to keep the idea that ancient studies still has a lot to teach us, even in the modern world, with all the technologies that we have and everything. It's like there's still a lot we can learn from ancient history, and it's reaching people at the level that they'll be interested in learning about it. That is like the super hard part. And I think novels is a great way to reach younger audiences, and introduce them to stuff like that. So I'm really, really excited to read a series that so much research has gone into to really make it, that experience. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Regarding the middle grade, my publisher actually, it was originally YA. Mm-hmm. And it seems the only difference between YA and middle grade is when Dan is being faced with certain death, he can't drop an F-bomb. Mm-hmm. So, and he can't really observe females as much.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems to be the only difference. So everything you read, it was actually just toned down a bit for middle grade, just F-bombs and observations. But
Yeah.
everything else is still the same as originally written. And my first book was actually part of something called the Forester Reading here in Canada, where it was actually in grades for 7 and 8s. It was actually kind of a part of reading clubs throughout Ontario, like
Oh,
schools.
cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So the next book in the series, I've already looked ahead at the series that's available to see on Goodreads, and your next one is Spartan Sacrifice. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I am a huge ancient Greece nerd, so I'm really excited for this one. Can you? I guess I want to talk a little bit more about your process for choosing these time periods. And like, what do you look for to say, okay, this has a ripple effect on the rest of history? Like, do you look at certain like characters, battles? What's the first thing you look for when you're trying to choose an era?
So, very first thing is, one, do I geek out about it?
Okay, fair enough.
So, 2, will Dan and Sam, my protagonists, fit in that time period? Because there are some incredible stories in African history, Asian history, Latin, like South American history, where, I had the ability to put them in Mongolia and have it work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could continually have my characters constantly go into these bits of history and actually work without having suspicion against them.
Mm-hmm.
Have them fit in without standing out like a sore thumb. It's like, hey, they're definitely foreigners.
Right.
So, and then the third criteria I have is I need to find some sort of turning point, some sort of critical event in that history. So I'm a huge fan of the Vikings. I've, and I would love to have told a story about some sort of event in Viking history. But in all honesty, the Vikings were just raiders and plunderers for about 200 years, and then they fizzled out after 1066. So 793 raid on Lindisfarne, 1066 Battle of Stamford Bridge, and that's their window. And aside from King Canute ruling England once, they didn't really do much. Nothing that I could really define and make a great story. And I also need this pivotal event to happen in a short span of time. Like, it can't be a 4-month-long story, a 5-month-long story. So that's kind of what I look for. So something like book 4, the Battle of Thermopylae, it was a 1-week battle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, although the Greeks lost, that defense there really mattered. That pivotal holding off the Persians for a week greatly changed things. If the Greeks had just folded in one day, Persia probably would have overrun Greece, changed all the history.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the criteria I look for when figuring out what to pick. So, for instance, book 5 is Joan of Arc at the Siege of Orleans. You have a 17-year-old female who is fighting against all the cultural and religious repression of her time against females, who just shows up in a battle as someone who's never fought before, never used weapons before, and completely alters French and European history just by her presence, all in the span of 1 week. So that's where book 5 goes, because and it's a great inspiring story for females, because it shows that history is not just male dominated. There are also bunch of women in history who have greatly changed the world.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing I write about, and that's how I choose what I write about.
That's awesome. I'm excited about that story too. That is cool. Anything else you want to share just about like your process, or like if anybody watching is interested in learning more about Mongol history, where would you suggest they start? And any other sources you can recommend for anybody who's interested in diving deeper into this culture and history?
Boy. So there's two professors or historians, Jack Weatherford and John Mann, who have written quite a few books on the Mongols. Jack Weatherford also, he wrote a history of Genghis Khan, and then he had a second book called Secret History of the Mongols, Mongol Queens. Ooh. Which actually, yeah, because as I said, Genghis Khan was surprisingly egalitarian. The one place where he didn't believe in equality is he would marry off his daughters to all these princes and kings that he had conquered, and then say, okay, great, you're now my son-in-law. Welcome to the army. Grab all your troops. We're conquering the next land. And by the way, my daughter is now in charge. So she's going to manage the kingdom. There was a statement in one of the books that I read that said something like, if a woman can manage a ger, she can manage a kingdom.
I like it.
Yeah. And so I thought that was this book was great from a just from an other side of the Mongol perspective, seeing how empowered the Mongol women are. Well, as long as this is where nepotism actually came in the Mongol Empire, because these were all daughters of Genghis Khan.
Right.
Yeah. There was no meritocracy here. This was pure nepotism, but they're very good books.
Very cool. You mentioned that the one surviving text from actual ancient Mongolia was transliterated into Chinese characters. You mentioned that earlier, and this question's kind of been in the back of my mind. Do you think, and this is just kind of like a speculation for fun question, do you think that text was originally written in Mongolian and this is just the only surviving copy that we have? Or do you think that someone in China was like, this is a cool history, I'm going to try and write it down? So pure speculation, obviously, but.
So I think all the Mongol texts were eventually destroyed. But since Mongols had conquered China, the way I understand it is this text was actually written like that for Chinese people to learn Mongolian better. Because apparently it has a whole bunch of notes on the side written in Chinese characters detailing things. So I think it was almost like a language primer.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. Were there more copies of this, or is this the only one that they have found in existence, or have they found?
So they have found in some monasteries and things like that portions written into other books. So you know how they're constantly finding scrolls that are like, oh, here's books 1 through 5 of the Bible, or oh, here's here's this chapter that we already knew from Herodotus, but well, here we just found another scroll with it. So they're constantly finding little bits and pieces of it here and there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but
that's kind of stuff I geek out on.
Yeah. There's actually this super huge version of the Secret History. It costs hundreds of dollars to buy, but it's by Igor Doroshovitz, who was actually, despite the name, an Italian scholar. Yeah, I didn't have $100 to spend on this one, but
that's cool. That is really cool. Okay, well, I think that is all the questions that I had. Do you have anything else you want to share to our current watchers or our future watchers who will see the recording?
I would only say that, the Mongols, they're they're not just what we've heard about with their, brutality and bloodshed and conquest. That's definitely a part of their history. But as I was saying earlier, the fact that they conquered all these areas and spread trade throughout the land, you could actually say they might have even helped bring about the European Renaissance because of this flow of ideas. Like Marco Polo, when he went to China, he was actually visiting the court of the Mongols, bringing back all the stuff from China, the concept of paper money, the fireworks, things like that. So the Mongols might have even nudged Europe towards a Renaissance because of that trade. So there's more than just the bloodshed and conquest to the history of the Mongols.
Cool. So, okay, now I have another question. You brought up Marco Polo. Mm-hmm. Have you seen the Netflix series?
No.
Marco? No? Okay. Never mind. I was going to ask what your thoughts were on the accuracy of that. Not necessarily like the things that happen in it, but like the way the culture is depicted. But if you haven't seen it, then
no.
Don't worry about it.
I actually try not to watch historical fiction. For instance, I watched the Vikings TV show, and I enjoyed it. Historical accuracy? Oh my gosh. It's like watching Gladiator, the movie.
Yeah.
It's going to be entertaining. You're not going to get historical accuracy.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. All right. I had another question and then it like poofed away. So, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fascinating discussion and I am really looking forward to the next 2 novels in the series. How many novels is it going to be when it's done? Or do 7. You have a finish?
I've already finished book 6, which takes place during the reign of Domitian.
Okay.
And so that's the Roman Empire. And the last book that I've probably about 2/3 of the way done is actually the Fourth Crusade, where Crusaders actually sacked Constantinople. Again, everybody thinks of the Crusaders going off to the Holy Land, but you have them going into Constantinople and destroying the largest Christian city at the time, forever weakening it, and eventually leading to the push of Islam into Europe and changing history forever.
Yeah, that's a little known fact. I was taking a few history classes a couple years ago, and I took one on the Byzantine Empire, and they covered that, and I was shocked. I was like, what madness is this?
So everybody thinks Crusades, they think Knights, they think Richard the Lionhearted, and Fourth Crusade, not so much.
Not so much. But also, when I thought about it, not surprising either. When I really thought about it. So you said you have a novel for that one. So that's 3 more in the series?
Yeah, so it ends at 7. So 7. So the Fourth Crusade, the fall of Constantinople, is the end of the series.
Okay. All right.
So we have Spartans, Joan of Arc, Roman Empire, and then fall of Constantinople to end it off.
Okay, that's exciting. Well, I am super, super looking forward to the rest of the books in the series, and I am going to go back and read the first 2 as well, because now I'm like hooked on the series. For everybody out there who have been sticking with us through the discussion, there is a QR code on the screen that goes directly to SASA's bookshop. If you would like to purchase this book and read it for yourself, all 15%, 10 to 15% of the proceeds goes directly to support SASA and our mission to bring ancient studies back into the spotlight. So thank you so much again, Andrew, for joining us. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I hope that we can have another discussion in the future for your next book.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'd love to come back.
Awesome.